Leaving the sports world can be a difficult experience, especially if you aren't sure what your next shift is going to be. Judy Gilbert, a former university hockey player and now a business leadership coach and consultant, will introduce you to other athletes who have made the successful transition to the business world. You will hear the tactics that they use to turn their experience into a successful new career and how you can too. Welcome to The Next Shift. Here is your host and mentor, Judy Gilbert.
Welcome to this episode of The Next Shift. I'm Judy Gilbert, and I'm thrilled to be here with you talking about how you can use the experience you have gained on the playing field to help you become successful in the business world as well. On this episode of The Next Shift, I am joined by hockey player turned entrepreneur Randy Uens. After a career in Canadian and European senior hockey, Randy found success in the business world, including an appearance on the Dragon's Den television show where he convinced all of the Dragons to be part of his startup. He is currently transforming one successful business and helping another startup get off the ground. On this episode, Randy talks about teamwork and how he used what he learned playing hockey to help him find success after the game. Randy, thanks so much for being here today. I really appreciate that you wanted to be part of this, and I think that given your background in sport, there's a lot of insight that you can provide to our listeners as well, so thank you for that.
No, my pleasure. I hope so.
So we've provided an introduction for our listeners, and but what we'd really like to hear, and perhaps they would too, is something that they wouldn't be aware of. So tell us something about yourself that nobody knows.
So something that somebody would know about me. So I would say probably the most current thing that's happening is that we've had an interesting development. We have a company that we're involved in. Obviously, I'm involved in a cannabis business and with the Wellington Dukes Hockey Club, but also I've been involved in something called Rhino Sports and Playland. Mm-hmm. And Rhino was a concept that I had for a long time. I tried to buy the Memorial Arena here in Belleville to do a hockey academy, and it never got off the ground for various reasons. And I ended up meeting a couple of guys who wanted to do a Playland kind of thing, and we thought we would merge the two things together. And unfortunately, it didn't work out the way I wanted. And we'll talk about failures and adversity as we get into this. But the adversity of watching, Rhino actually did okay. It was one of those things that was working, but it wasn't working. And the ultimate demise of it has been just market with insurance rates and other things. So now we're doing a pivot into something that I'm passionate about, which is hockey. We're turning it into a full-blown hockey academy.
Wow.
And so that's kind of exciting for me, and getting all these local hockey guys together. And one of the things that we're trying to do is get guys like Derek Smith, ex-NHLer, and Chris Longo, ex-AHLer, and these kind of guys, and bring them together to have a cohesive unit. And that's probably the most passionate thing. It's one of those things where I'm not really expecting to make any money off this. You put all your effort into something, and you're passionate about it. So this is probably something that's new that no one would know that we're behind.
Wow, great. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. So we'll look forward to perhaps having some more conversation around that. So tell me, Randy, what drew you to hockey? What was it about hockey where you sort of started in your sports?
I'll say there's two sports. So it was hockey and lacrosse. Okay. So I was kind of a two-sport guy, and I think, from your family background, two sports was minimum, I think there's always important for young athletes to have two sports. And I learned a lot from both. And initially I was drawn to hockey just because of Bobby Orr, right? I'm a kid watching TV. I see Bobby Orr. I can remember I was, the 72 series, I was 5. I remember being pulled out of kindergarten class to watch the final few games. And I remember watching that. Bobby Orr obviously wasn't playing, but that was probably my first idea of what hockey was about. It was a big deal. I was learning to skate at that point. Right. And then the next couple of years I started to watch more, and Bobby Orr was my guy. And so I remember right up to 76 that the last sort of hurrah for Bobby Orr was the guy that made me want to play hockey. That whole 72 thing when he gets flipped in the air, that goal. Yeah. I remember like yesterday. I've probably seen it in replay 150
many,
times.
Many times,
yeah.
Right.
So that was probably the big one. Lacrosse was a different one, was where I kind of was looking for something to do in the summer that was different. I didn't like baseball too much. My parents were, I had a cousin that was playing lacrosse, and I thought that was really cool. He was in St. Catharines, which is lacrosse hotbed. Belleville, not so much. But I managed to start playing lacrosse here, and Belleville had a fairly decent program when I started, and it slowly dwindled over the years. But, there was a core of really good lacrosse players that came out of Belleville that managed to play at a fairly high level, and all those things that we learned from that as well. So those are the two sports that I was focused on.
Can you share with us your transition from sport into business and what you're doing now? So give us a little bit of some history around that.
Yeah. So my hockey career was pretty unusual is the best way to put it. I was a kid that was always probably considered one of the better players in our league in Eastern Ontario at my age group. And I didn't grow like every other kid's thought. I had a bit of a medical problem that caused me not to grow as fast. And back in those days in the 80s, if you weren't 6 foot,
right.
100,
it was about growth.
You had to be the right size at the right time. And it was a different, so I was a little bit late to the party. And when I finally started getting my opportunities, I was a little older. I was 19 or 20, and I really had a burning desire because of sort of going from being the guy to being a guy that just another guy floating around from team to team. And when I started to develop and get better, I had some opportunities. So I was playing senior A after university, and I took a job with a steel company. I went out, and they let me pick where I wanted to work. I had choices all the way across the country, and I picked Calgary so I could play a little bit of senior hockey out there while I was there. It was a good situation for me, and I started to skate a little bit with just as a black shirt with the Canadian Olympic team. It wasn't anything. I knew I wasn't there as being part of the Olympic team. We were just there as filler. But what happened was a guy came to me and said, you should go play hockey somewhere. So I started my career and stopped my career all in one swoop. I stopped my work career with the steel company that I was hired by and went and played hockey. So I had a little bit of a 2-year hiatus from from start to whatever. And I learned a lot while I was in Europe playing hockey. And I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about the things that I was probably felt were unfinished in my life that I wanted to prove to myself or prove to other people maybe. So that was a really huge part for me. So when I came back home, it was kind of weird. The economic times were a little bit odd, and the team had changed ownership, and I wasn't sure about going back for another year. And I decided, I have a university degree. I'm just going to go get a real job, and I couldn't find a real job right away. I sold TVs for like 6 months. It was not the greatest. I ended up getting involved with a newspaper here locally for a little period of time. But in the back of my head, I always knew that I wanted to get into food or drugs or waste. And so I started planning, and it came from my hockey career, knowing that you had to be resilient and going through a little adversity. But I planned and was very diligent about where I wanted to be 3 years, 5 years, or whatever. Yeah. And by planning that out, I sort of set goals for myself. And I had to work. It wasn't easy to get to where I wanted to go, but I ultimately got there because of just straight up hard work.
Yeah. Well, and I think when we talk about part of this conversation is around those portable skills or those transferable skills, and you sort of hit it when you said that resilience is certainly one of them, and as a direct result of your time in sport as well. And so when you think about that transition, what are some of the other challenges that sort of presented themselves during that transition from recognizing, okay, I'm not going to be playing hockey anymore, and I'm going out to certainly find a job. And obviously, what did that market look like at that time? Yeah,
it was, the challenge was that it happened so suddenly. It was a matter of the team changed ownership, and I lost my work visa. And so I couldn't go back. And I probably could have went back in retrospect. I probably could have rolled the dice and just packed my bag and went and just found a team. It wouldn't have been too tough. I could have easily done that. And for whatever reason, I didn't go. And there's a little bit of regret in me saying I should have went back and played 2 or 3 more years, but it doesn't matter. It's, it's past now. But that was probably the biggest thing because it was so sudden, I sold my car because I was ready to go. And the day I was going to leave, the work visa falls apart and the team changed ownership. They said, well, you can come back. And there was some Russians that were showing up and all kinds of stuff that was kind of weird. And I just sort of said, time to move on. And so it was really starting with nothing. I had no belongings. I had a little bit of cash that I made, and I had nothing. And at the time, the economic times weren't great, and especially in our area here. It was things were kind of struggling. You're looking at it's 1992, 93, some of that area. It wasn't the easiest market to get into, and I didn't know what the hell I was going to do. And I actually thought I was going to go play hockey again. And it was just, I spent a good year of just spinning my tires.
Yeah. And what really resonated with me when you said it abruptly came to an end. And I think, my career, although I was only I was at the varsity level, whereas I knew it would be coming to an end, and playing a little bit after that, but then having some medical issues and knees and that type of thing, all of a sudden it was over. And then how do we fill that void, right? And so there's a piece around that identity as well, because growing up, it was about the sport, and we were known for that sport. And then all of a sudden we're trying to carve out a new identity for ourselves. And what does that look like? And what do you mean we have to go out? Now it's about careers and business, right? And so I think that's part of that transition of really trying to find ourselves all over again in some cases too.
It's absolutely true. And trying to reinvent yourself.
Yes.
But at the same time, part of it is having confidence that you develop. So one of the things that I mentioned before, when I went through the process, playing in Europe, I was playing in England, and it was really good hockey, probably underrated in a lot of ways. But the reality was, on Wednesday nights, we drove to Zamboni. It's not like it wasn't, after practice, we had to drive to Zamboni once in a while. So it wasn't like I was playing for the Chicago Blackhawks or Montreal Canadiens. We were there playing for the love of it, and we were getting paid a little bit of cash to do it. But it was a way to prove yourself to yourself. A lot of the guys I was playing with, some of them had college careers and some of them had minor pro careers. And in the league, there was 30 guys who had played NHL. And so there was you could gauge yourself against these guys that had long careers. You go, I'm better than this guy. But we were always there striving for something. So when you get home and you come back, you got to start that all over again. You have to prove that you have value to people. Everybody's got a university degree. There's a lot of people, you come home thinking it's going to be easy. It's not easy. You got to set yourself apart and prove what how you're valuable to somebody when you're starting your career. And I think having that ability to do that, and then factor in not only being competitive, but also being a team person, and being a team first. So whatever you're doing to make the entity that you're working with or playing with better, and having that mentality of being a team, and it just starts to filter down into every association you have in your life. And I think it makes you a better asset to any company if you're that person.
And those are those transferable skills that we're talking about, right? It's that team player. It's being that team player. It's being focused. It's being competitive, and lots of hard work, and really working well under pressure, all of the time. Right, and transferring that now into this, what we call our new role, and carving that out. And what does that look like? Doesn't it?
For sure. There was a period of time when Rhino, so if you picture Rhino was a bag business that I had. You buy a bag, you fill it up with a ton and a half of junk, and we come and take it away. It started in my garage, and we took it national in Canada within a year and a half, and did the Dragon's Den and all that kind of stuff. And we ended up selling it into the US. But before that happened, 2008 was a pretty miserable time. We were about to go national in the US. My angel investor locally had sort of tapped out. He wasn't really willing to put any more money into the situation unless we grew it, which was understandable. And so I was looking for investors to help me. We had a deal with 1-800-GOT-JUNK that we were going to launch in the US with Lowe's, but we were looking for more funding. And so we were going to get involved in an IPO with a bunch of Italian guys in Toronto. Hard to believe in the waste business there'd be Italian guys involved. But so they were going to do an IPO and we were going to be kind of the sexy piece of it. Well, before Lehman Brothers went down, our IPO fell apart, and we ended up having a really dicey situation that came out of it. And it was a point where it was almost extortion what was going down, and we actually had to sneak all of our inventory out and, get it out of a warehouse. It was really kind of dodgy. And to have the resilience to be able to fight through all that when someone's doing something that's incredibly shady and illegal and has you sort of over a barrel, which could have brought our whole company down in one fell swoop. And to be able to have the resourcefulness, like with my team, and I'm not just saying myself, I had a small team of 3 or 4 people, and we were able to pull off we still call it Ocean's 14, that we managed to get out of there. And out of that, the phoenix out of those ashes was that we ended up walking into a deal with Waste Management, the largest waste company in the world, and doing a deal and taking that company to be Bagster now, which is, in 48 states and everywhere around. So, it was kind of, it's funny to think of that day when, we're loading up 5 transport trailers in a hurry to get it out of there before our stuff was locked down. Yeah. And having something simple like a forklift breakdown, and, we couldn't get the forklift to work, and we ended up finding a mousetrap with a little spring to hook the throttle back up to it. Those kind of things was just, I'll never forget it.
No, and really a lot of that, it's not, can we do it? It's how are we going to do it, right? That there is no,
That's right?
And you're going to go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
And I think that, I certainly have not been involved in something like that, but I think even for me, in terms of resurrecting my consulting business and thinking that I can be successful in this
Absolutely.
Part of my business, and because of the tools and because of the things that I've acquired previously, and having been involved in sport, right, and that resilience and that focus and that flexibility and being adaptable to all of those things. And so I think it's unconscious that we use all of those, but how do we be more aware of those going in? And using them in that respect.
And it attracts you to people with like-minded.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you find people that have that factor in them that you appreciate. A guy that I'm working with now, he's the chairman of our board, and he was one of the first cannabis producers in Canada. He had a coup at the board level, and he was squeezed out, and don't cry for him, he did quite well. But, I would have probably gone off on a boat somewhere for 6 months, and he's resurrected and created another global company. And having that resilience and that faith in his own talents is and you're attracted to people like that, and you see what like you said, where you came from and how you built your company out from there. It's you attract other people that are like-minded because of that. And it takes one nut, right, to create a movement.
That's right.
But it takes a second nut to follow the first nut.
Follow the first and to build that. And I think it's about our values, right? And I think that it is similar, and we're all different. We have different experiences and different expertise, but I think there's similarities in terms of those values. And I think that that's what resonates with me in terms of those like-minded people that we surround ourselves with.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of being initially part of that team in sport. And I think that when we gravitate to whatever we're doing in business, we gravitate to situations that are similar to that, perhaps. And I know from my perspective now, in working more on my own and not part of a daily team, that there's a void there. For sure. And so now with my clients, I fill that void with that team approach when I'm doing work for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So it's interesting that those skills, that once we hang on to them and carry through with those, that they stay with us. And that they're ever present. But I think it's more on a subconscious level.
But knowing in a consulting role like you are, knowing how to trigger events inside of a group dynamic, right? And that comes from being in a team, being able to interact with people effectively so that they can get the best of themselves. It's like being a captain in a hockey team. There's no difference.
No, that's right.
And being inclusive and not pushing someone outside of a circle, and it happens in companies all the time. You see someone that gets isolated, and then the performance flagged, and eventually you're having to spend a whole bunch of money and resources and trying to replace that person.
That's right.
Where it could have been easily solved with inclusiveness and coaching.
Yeah, right? And that's interesting because I just finished up with a client, and it was around respectful behavior, assertive communication, and how do we treat one another in the workplace? Because the cost to replace that individual is great compared to being able to keep them and deal with those issues. And oftentimes people don't leave, most times people don't leave an organization because of the company. They leave because of an individual.
That's
and
true.
whether that's someone in a leadership role, right? And so I think that really for me is to be able to go in and help those organizations have difficult conversations around those things. Then they've got someone that they can sort of make this, put someone else in place to be able to do that, and whereas they don't have to do it and sort of take the blame on that.
Right. The whole idea of resilience. So, Ken Clement, who is I'm working with now, who also owns the Wellington Dukes, and he's become a partner and a friend. One of the things that attracted me to him was his resilience. He's a guy who started the third LP in Canada, licensed producer of cannabis, and was squeezed out of by a coup at the board level, more or less. And like I mentioned before, he's probably one of those guys that could have easily just went out and sat on a yacht.
Yeah.
But now he's taken his company. We've created a valuation that's probably pushing into $500 million within a year and a half. And, it's all about just hard work and resilience. The guy flies all over the world, works harder than anyone I know travel wise. And, it's all about having belief in what he's doing. And that resilience has brought a team, including myself and some other guys that, could be doing something on their own. But you're attracted to that. You're attracted to being part of it. It's like flies to a light in a you see a guy like that's willing to put everything on the line. You want to be there and work hard for him. And it's been an interesting ride with him as well. It's a complete between when I did my Rhino Bag thing, I got involved in a nutraceutical company. It was a startup again. We took an IPO, and it was a really interesting. I learned a lot, not the point where everybody made a whole lot of money off of it, but we learned a lot, and it led us into where we are now. And I was attracted immediately to Ken, who was a hockey guy. He was a fighter back in the day in BC, and he just continues to fight. He's like a dog on a bone at the time.
Good.
And that's, like I said, you're attracted to those people.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So I've got 5 questions, and we're going to take about 90 seconds.
Okay.
And you can just, first thing that comes to mind, okay?
Can I pass it?
No. Well, I was pretty definite about that. No. Yeah, if you want to.
Okay.
Favorite hobby?
Favorite hobby? Hockey.
Okay.
Yeah, it's too easy.
That's too easy?
Yeah,
That's
I
interesting.
can throw in
okay.
music. You can throw music in there too.
Okay. 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
Determined, probably easygoing, a little too much at times, maybe.
Okay. All right. And what's the first thing you do in the morning?
Tea with lemon, green tea with lemon.
Okay.
And usually maybe a smoothie, but usually green tea with lemon right away.
All right. First things first.
Yeah.
Okay. And what would be, if somebody gave you a compliment, what would it be?
Probably being easy to get along with most of the time. I think I understand. I think I empathize well. So, and I listen fairly well. I try to stop myself from talking at times. So, but I do think I listen fairly well.
Good.
So that'll be it.
Okay. And when are you most productive?
When am I most productive? I have periods where I'm more and less. I'm not the greatest morning guy. I do okay. Probably afternoons, I do really well, and sometimes again later in the evening too. I do well.
Okay.
So I get a lot accomplished. And I think it's more to do with no distractions.
Good. Okay. Randy, thanks so much for being here today and
Thank
for having the conversation with us. And, I appreciate all of your insight and what you're working on. And I think it really proves that transition from sport to business and a lot of those skills that we take with us, that you've certainly been successful in doing that. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.